Well, we're now joined in studio by international relations expert Dr. Emmanuel Navon. Dr. Navon, thank you as always. Always lovely to have you here in studio. So the reaction to the announcement, it's not a huge surprise given the fact that we know that Guatemala did vote in favor of the U.S. at the General Assembly last week.
Right. Not only did Guatemala vote in favor, against the resolution condemning the United States, but it's also always had very close relations with Israel. And by the way, it also had its embassy in Jerusalem in the 60s and in the 70s. As a matter of fact, there were 16 countries that had their embassy in West Jerusalem, most of them from Latin America, indeed in Western Jerusalem, and they only moved it back to Tel Aviv in 1980 after the Knesset, the Israeli parliament, passed a law declaring United Jerusalem the capital of Israel. So Guatemala might be followed by other Latin American countries, also countries in Eastern Europe. We know, for example, that the president of the Czech Republic has also spoken favorably for moving the embassy of his country to Jerusalem. He also specified Western Jerusalem, but there might be more countries to follow.
So it's interesting as well because we know that Israel would be very happy with this news. But what kind of fallout, if any, would there be for other countries against Guatemala for the decision?
Well, I think, again, because this happened already in the past and there was no fallout against Guatemala, but we have to understand that when it comes to Guatemala and other Latin American countries, one of the reasons why they're so close to Israel is because during the Cold War, we basically fought together against the communist militias in Latin America, and all those countries were very much in cooperation with Israel and also against those guerrillas that were allied to the PLO. So very often during the Cold War, Israel and Latin American countries were on the same side. So there's a long history of cooperation of those countries opposing the PLO. On the other hand, of course, left-wing leaders in South America, such as Venezuela's President Maduro, they're very much in favor of the PLO and the Palestinians. So I would say all the center-right governments in Latin America were always very favorable to Israel. More will follow. Anyways, they do not have very good relations with Iran and with the Arab world. There's also, don't forget today, one of the other reasons why many countries in Latin America cooperate with Israel is because of the Iranian threat. Also in Latin America, the presence of Hezbollah units, and that's another reason why they see in Israel a very important ally.
Now, you mentioned that other countries might follow suit, and we've been talking about Latin American countries. Let's take a quick look at Africa. We know that South Africa announced a few days ago it was going to be downgrading its embassy here in Israel to a liaison office. But we also know that Netanyahu has spent a lot of time in Africa trying to garner support in the recent weeks and recent months. What kind of response are we expecting in the next few months from Africa?
So you mentioned South Africa. Obviously, the ANC that's been ruling South Africa since the end of apartheid was always very close to the PLO, so that's not new. But in the rest of Africa, at the General Assembly last week, Togo voted against the resolution, and many countries from West Africa also abstained in the vote. As a matter of fact, the Israel's diplomatic investment in the last few years in Africa is already starting to bear fruit. Because again, with African countries, sub-Saharan Africa, Israel had very close relations from the early 60s, and they were broken right after the Yom Kippur War under the pressure of the Arab League, and they were renewed in the 80s. And today you also have this renewed relations between African countries and Israel, because again, they're also fighting terrorism. They need Israeli technology for agriculture and other areas. It's not always, you don't always see the implication at the General Assembly. Very often those countries have very close ties with Israel. They don't always vote with us at the General Assembly. But again, these processes take time, and I do believe that with Western African country and Eastern African country, you will see more and more countries voting in favor of Israel at the General Assembly.
And we'll certainly be watching those developments, Dr. Emmanuel Navon.